Explosions in the kitchen are generally considered a bad idea, but just occasionally, a small one can produce something delicious. A dried corn kernel contains lots of nice food-like components: carbohydrates, proteins, iron, and potassium. But they're very densely packed, and there's a tough armoured shell in the way. The potential is tantalising. But to make it edible, you need some extreme reorganisation. An explosion is just the ticket, and very conveniently, this seed carries the seeds of its own destruction within it. Last night, I did a bit of ballistic cooking and made popcorn. It's always a relief to discover that a tough, unwelcoming exterior can conceal a softer inside. But why does this one make fluff instead of blowing itself to bits? Once the oil in the pan was hot, I added a spoonful of kernels, put the lid on, and left it while I put the kettle on to make tea. Outside, a huge storm was raging, and chunky raindrops were hammering against the window. The corn sat in the oil and hissed gently. It looked to me as though nothing was happening, but inside the pan, the show had already started. Each corn kernel contains a germ, which is the start of a new plant, and the endosperm, which is there as food for the new plant. The endosperm is made up of starch packaged into granules, and it contains about 14% water. As the kernels sat in the hot oil, that water was starting to evaporate, turning into steam. Hotter molecules move faster, so that as each kernel heated up, there were more and more water molecules whooshing around inside it as steam. The evolutionary purpose of a corn kernel's shell is to withstand assault from outside, but it now had to contain an internal rebellion, and it was acting like a mini pressure cooker. The water molecules that had turned to steam were trapped with nowhere to go, so the pressure inside was building up. Molecules of gas were continually bumping into each other and into the walls of the container, and as the number of gas molecules increased and they moved faster, they were hammering harder and harder on the inside of the shell. Pressure cookers work because hot steam cooks things very effectively, and it's no different inside popcorn. As I searched for tea bags, the starch granules were being cooked into a pressurized gelatinous goo, and the pressure kept going up. The outer shell of a popcorn kernel can withstand this stress, but only up to a point. When the temperature inside approaches 180 degrees Celsius and the pressure gets up to nearly 10 times the normal pressure of the air around us, the goo is on the edge of victory. I gave the pan a little shake and heard the first dull pop echoing round the inside. After a couple of seconds, it sounded as though a mini machine gun was being fired in there, and I could see the lid lifting as it got hit from underneath. Each individual pop also came with a fairly impressive puff of steam from the edge of the pan lid. I left it for a moment to pour a cup of tea, and in those few seconds, the barrage from underneath shifted the lid and fluff started taking flight. At the moment of catastrophe, the rules change. Until that point, a fixed amount of water vapour is confined, and the pressure it exerts on the inside of the shell increases as the temperature increases. But when the hard shell finally succumbs, the insides are exposed to the atmospheric pressure in the rest of the pan, and there is no volume limit anymore. The starchy goo is still full of hot hammering molecules, but nothing is pushing back from the other side. So it expands explosively until the pressure inside matches the pressure outside. Compact white goo becomes expansive white fluffy foam, turning the entire kernel inside out, and as it cools, it solidifies. The transformation is complete. Tipping the popped corn out revealed a few casualties left behind. Dark, burnt, unpopped corn rattled sadly round the bottom of the pan. If the outer shell is damaged, water vapour escapes as it is heated, and the pressure never builds up. The reason that popcorn pops and other grains don't is that all the others have porous shells. If a kernel is too dry, perhaps because it was harvested at the wrong time, there isn't enough water inside it to build up the pressure needed to burst the shell. Without the violence of an explosion, inedible corn remains inedible. I took the bowl of perfectly cooked fluff and the tea over to the window and stood watching the storm. Destruction doesn't always have to be a bad thing.